This is the Misdirected Mark podcast, a podcast about gaming, game mastering, and entertaining you, our listeners. We are explicit, you have been warned, and I'd like to thank Mike Willard for letting us use his music on our show. Now let's pick up those mics and get on with this thing.
All right. Parson Vale and Mokjus make it out of the maintenance door as the building collapses behind them.
Mokjus gives Parson a dirty look. Why'd you blow up the building? Things were going well with Narson. That was supposed to be our place to lay low for a while.
Parson shrugs. It was a snap decision when the assassins showed up. I was just trying to make a small distraction. I didn't realize Narson was storing E3 and sap wine in those crates, or I would have never lit them on fire.
Well, you made it out, and you still have the MacGuffin orb, so, what are you doing next?
Mokjus runs to the nearest hover car. He'll try to break the side screen and hotwire the thing.
Parson Vale draws his blaster and watches for pursuit.
Okay, Jer. Mokjus does this all the time, so I think that's pretty much just a standard difficulty. Go ahead and make your roll.
Success with a complication.
All right, cool. So you get the vehicle started.
As soon as Val gets in, Mokjus takes off, accelerating as quick as possible.
I jump aboard and strap in. What was the complication?
Well, as Mokjus drives away, Parson gets a chance to look around the vehicle. It's built for speed and style. It has custom seats and a really dope high-end sound system. And there's even a monogram on the dash, this big stylized N.
Crap. We just stole Narson's ride, didn't we? She's going to be able to track us.
Aw.
She's never going to forgive me for this. It's going to be just like the spring formal all over again.
So as you speed away, you can see several grav bikes just pull out onto the street behind you, in full pursuit, right? Several of the bikers are starting to aim up shots and starting to shoot over the car. And through the erratic gunfire, you can see Narson's driving one of the bikes.
Good news, Mock. Narson survived.
Great. See if you can do something to distract them or slow them down, but don't get her killed.
Parson takes aim and fires.
Oh, okay. All right. So this is going to be a couple rolls, right? So Mock just needs to maneuver through the streets and dodge incoming fire, and I think that's going to be a hard test. Parson, you're firing at the pursuers. That is definitely a difficult test.
But I have vehicular combatant.
Okay, fair. That drops it to hard.
And mobile sniper.
Oh, I forgot you took that. All right, that's going to drop it to standard difficulty. So just make that roll.
All right, 3 successes and an advantage.
1 failure and 2 complications.
Well, now. All right, so Parson manages to shoot 2 of the bikes, causing them to careen into a third, and that leaves only Narson in pursuit. But Mokjus, one of the shots hits the rear of the vehicle, and you clip a road sign, spinning the hover car out of control. And by the time you regain control, you have to come to a full stop in front of an Imperial grav truck. And as Narson pulls up behind you, the door of the grav truck opens, and a very angry Captain Tellus comes storming down the ramp.
Well, Mokjus, I hope you have a plan. It's going to be difficult to talk our way out of this one.
All right, and with that, welcome to the 412th episode of the Misdirected Mark podcast. Tonight we delve into setting difficulties for your players, how difficult game mechanics deal with difficulties, and how to use difficulties to set the tone and theme of the game. On the way, the chat room for life will add their own questions and suggestions, and then we'll dive into the after show. But first, my name is Jerry.
My name is Phil.
And I am Old Man Logan.
And we are not streaming tonight.
No, we are not. So there is no chat room.
There's no chat room tonight. It's just the 3 of us for the first time in a long time. We had a little OBS issue and weren't able to resolve it before showtime, and so we still need to record a show. So that's what we're doing. But we won't be taking any break and checking in with the chat room at any point during the evening. So we might be a little bit faster. And it's a shame because we were going to debut our ring lights tonight.
Yeah.
Yes.
We all bought ring lights to kind of improve the look of the stream by giving ourselves better lighting. But alas, no, tonight will just be a radio night.
Like the old days.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We're going to get it all fixed up. We'll be back streaming next week, so no worries. And otherwise, the show will be pretty much what you expect.
And speaking of what you expect, before we can enter the house misdirected, we need to do our temperature check. So, Phil, How you feeling?
Emotionally, I've been like all over the place.
Yeah.
Since like the weekend, right? Like I could not help to get caught up in Twitter when the president went full plague. And so I got way too caught up in Twitter and news and politics, which never makes me feel great. And then today I hit like a complete low spot with all of it. Like just like this guy is just nothing, like Covida, as I like as Twitter has now referred to him as, COVID and Avita from the balcony scene, Covida. So Covida,
Yes.
like just I know we don't do a lot of politics on the show, and I won't go into any depth, but I'm just so done with this guy. Like, I'm done. Either the election or nature. I don't care which way he gets removed, but like one way or the other, I'm done with this guy. Anyway, so I wasn't feeling really good. I went and just closed up Twitter, and I took a bike ride, which made me feel a lot better. And it was actually kind of nice today. Like, I don't think there's going to be too many more days like this. Like, I didn't have to put on all my cold riding gear. So I went out for a ride. I came back, it felt a lot better, watched a bunch of TikTok, felt a lot better. And I'm doing okay. Like, I'm mentally, I'm okay. And physically, I just, the weather's been tricky. I haven't been able to, with rain and stuff, haven't been able to ride as nonstop as I did when I first got the bike. Which makes me sad, but I did get, like I said, I got a good ride in today, so I'm feeling pretty good. I'm actually, for showtime, I'm in good shape.
Good.
How about you, Jer?
Pretty good actually. The weather with the recent up and down where it's warm and cold, my allergies have been killing me. But Lily's got me on good allergy meds, and so I've been up and down and around, and just today was good, but around 2:00, all of a sudden, all the meds I took hit. I came walking out of my office, and I just stood there for a second, and I'm like, I have like a giant cloud in my head. And my office staff laughed and we all had a good chuckle, and that got me back in good mood. And I went back in and had some cookies and got myself back in going. So overall, I'm feeling pretty good. Just a little bit tired and low-key, and obviously a little verklempt. So, but yeah, overall feeling good. I'm not on the Twitters right now at all, so I haven't been getting too stuck up in
You are
that.
not missing anything right now, man.
I've been trying to avoid it for a little while, but that's okay. We do what we can.
Yep.
So, yep. How about you, Bob?
Much like Phil, I had a bit of an Misdirected Mark word scramble. A bit of an emotional roller coaster. The start to the week wasn't terrible, but I did a little doom scrolling and got caught up in some of that. And then today I was just starting to feel halfway decent, and then saw the news that Eddie Van Halen passed. And I was like, son of a... like, 2020 could just bite it, right?
I didn't realize that he had been sick previously.
Oh, yeah, he's been fighting cancer for
a while. I think he lost part of his tongue back in early 2000s.
So that kind of crushed me for the evening, and I was just trying to work myself back into show shape when our OBS problems hit. So I'm on the edge. But I'm ready to do a show. Physically, I'm feeling pretty good. Yesterday was a hard day because I got a shot in my foot for my arthritis. And the first day, usually a day or two, depending, give or take, it's really painful because the shot's fresh and everything's kind of settling. So yesterday was not a good day. My foot hurt like crazy all day, like wild, like wacky, like whatever.
Did they not give you one in the shoulder?
I didn't ask for one in the shoulder yet. In fact, they're not going to do anything about my shoulder until I go to physical therapy.
Gotcha.
So, but today my foot felt a million times better, and like Phil said, super nice out. So after work, I took an abbreviated walk. I could still feel it as I was walking. I was like favoring the leg a little bit, and my calf tightened up because of me favoring it. But I got a nice little abbreviated walk. I got my step count for the day, so that felt good. So. Physically feeling pretty good. Need to pump myself up emotionally, which will be accomplished tonight with the DS9 watch party. Yay! And so I'm good. So let's enter the house.
There we go. All right. So as we are accustomed to do, we'll just talk about one thing that's going on with us. But so Bob, you were walking. Your one thing has to do with walking, doesn't it?
It does actually, because I've been wearing a Fitbit for 4.5 years, maybe something along those lines. And thanks again to Phil for giving me his original Fitbit when he upgraded. But I started to feel like this is like the super basic version. That all it does is count steps, and it syncs with MyFitnessPal to look at your water intake and your calorie intake and everything, so you can get that information. But really, all it does is count steps. And I decided that I want more information now, so I bought a new Fitbit, the new Inspire 2, which will give like heart rate, more sleep information. That's right, this one tracks sleep too. More sleep information, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And it has a display on it, so I can actually use it like a watch, because it'll have a little clock on it, and I can get some other information.
Yeah, nice.
So upgrading that to get a little bit more information and go a little deeper down that rabbit hole. So that's my latest toy. That should be here Thursday this week. So I'll have it for the weekend to see how things go. What about you, Phil?
I'm playing Hades. I'm also playing Minecraft, but I'm playing Hades as well. And if you have not seen this game yet, it's delightful. I don't want to take it apart too much, because we could really do a whole segment on it, but it is it's like a top down. So you're like looking down at your character running around, but you are the son of Hades and you are trying to escape from the underworld to join your Olympian aunts, like uncles and cousins and stuff, at Mount Olympus, and they are trying to help you escape. So they periodically give you gifts and stuff to try to make it easier for you to get out. But the cool part to the game is that the part of the game where you escape is a roguelike. So it is a random generation of rooms and creatures and treasures like that you can get, and you play that part until you die. And then when you die, because you're in Hades, you just wake up in the house of Hades where your father is. And then there's a second phase of the game where you are there's like stories and characters you can talk to as you walk around the house. And then you can do like all your leveling up and everything. You go to your bedroom where you have like a mirror that you stare in, and that like you can like upgrade your stats, and there's a weapons room that you can go to like unlock additional weapons. And then when you're ready, you try to escape again. And you just keep doing this loop. You keep trying to escape, you get killed, you come back, the story advances, you level up, you go back out into the dungeon and kill more monsters. And it's this really kind of neat partitioning of phases of the game. And the graphics are fantastic. It's very replayable, because you are expected to die. And then you just keep coming back. And then the game does a really good job of feeding you the game in small doses. So like when the game first starts, not everything is present or active. And as you die multiple cycles, the game like slowly starts to unfold and provide you with more information and more stuff that's going on. I really dig it. And here's the kicker. It's available on Steam. It's available on the Epic Games site. It is available for both PC and Mac, and it's $25. Like, I don't know how you get like a better deal than this. Like, it's all of those things. It's $25, and it works on 2 platforms. Like, it's so rare that any game that's popular actually works for a Mac. Like, I was so excited. Anyway, I've been playing it for I've been playing for like a week now.
That's cool. Yeah, I got to go in and watch somebody play it the other day, and it looks like a lot of fun. I like the graphics. They're not super complicated, but they're detailed enough to be interesting to watch. Yeah. So
it's a bit button mashy. Yeah. Like when you're out fighting, like there's a bit of button mashing going on there, but I dig it. So cool. That's me, Jer.
For me, it was Lego Quest. I'm a VIP member of Lego and have been for years. And this year, when they had their brand new big set, the Mos Eisley Cantina, they offered it as a pre-order for VIP members. And actually, Bob got in on that right off the bat. About an hour after they did that, they sold out.
Yeah.
mostly because they allowed VIP members to buy multiple copies. And so when I tried to get it, I couldn't get it. And I called Lego directly and had a long conversation with them. And they're like, there's nothing we can do about it. And they said, we're going to have some more October 1st when the final release drops for everybody, but we're not reserving any for the VIPs then either. So being the VIP, basically, what they basically said was, well, fuck you. But the day that the Lego store here in Buffalo had their grand opening, my wife noticed it was opening like an hour later. So I called them directly and said, I'm a VIP. I'm looking for this. Do you have the set? They said, we do, but we can't put them aside. I said, I'll be there in 10 minutes. So when I got there, they just pushed one aside for me because you still have to wait in line to get in. But they spaced everybody out like 10 feet apart. They only let like 6 or 8 people in the store. They were being very, 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 very COVID careful. And so I was able to get mine. And the people at the Lego store could not have been nicer. They had sales and discounts on stuff. They had extra freebies to give away. You got to use all of your Lego points. I got some extra coupons and stuff. So I ended up getting it. I got it for less than I would have gotten it from the website. And I got a bunch of other cool stuff with it. And the people at the Lego store were just amazing. So what started out as me being very disappointed because it's still not available on the website. It was supposed to go on sale again October 1st, and they're still sold out, and they don't know when they're getting any more in. So, but I got the set, so that made me very happy because you may have noticed I'm a little bit of a Lego fan, and this was a set I've been waiting for a long time.
Indeed.
So that was me. So how about some announcements?
Sure. Well, we continue on with the DS9 watch party. We're getting firmly into season 3. We have a short week this week because there are so many good episodes. We're only watching 4 episodes. We're watching 2 of them tonight, and then we only have 2 for this week. And then, and that's because I really try to do the watch parties for kind of key episodes. I don't always hit it. Sometimes we have to hit like a couple non-key ones, but I really wanted tonight's 2 episodes are really good. But really I was lining up for next week's 2 episodes. Next week's 2 episodes are really big story wise. And I wanted to have us watching those together. So this week is a short week, although the episodes that we're not covering are totally still watchable. Like they're all like all 3 of the ones that aren't on the list are all good. So if you're like, I want more DS9, just watch the other ones. You won't be disappointed. Yeah. You can still get in on that. We're doing that. That's out on the forums, on the Misdirected Mark forums. Just go out to the forums, scroll down to the other section. You can't miss it. It says big words, DS9 watch party. You could jump right in. Even if you don't want to keep up with us, if you're like, oh, I can't do this because like you're already 7 weeks ahead of me, but I really want to get into DS9, do it on your own. Like you can do your own self-study course. Like just all the weeks are listed. Just pick a week and start watching. And after you've watched an episode, go into the forums. I put up a post for pretty much every episode, and you can leave your thoughts about the episodes in there.
There have been a lot of really good insights into some of the episodes too. I know we've had quite a few people that have gotten in and talked about what they liked about it, and what kind of revelations they had seeing it again for those people who'd seen it the first time. So
absolutely,
very, very cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah. So and you know, the other use you could use for it is if you have a friend or family member who's like, oh, I've always been interested in DS9, but like I wouldn't even know how to get into it. Grab our list and give it to them. Be like, hey, take this. All right. We also since it dropped last week and it's now actually live for us recording, because we are recording 1 week in the past. It is the 6th of January. Sig City of Blades, Jason Pitt's game, is up and funded.
One correction, is the 6th of October, not January.
Jesus, sorry. I got the 6th.
It's the 437th day of March.
That is true.
That I would go with that.
The year of shit, 2020.
Yes.
So Sig City of Blades, I'll jump in on this real quick. If you want to take a look at it, Jason did a brilliant thing. He's got the domain kickstarter.games. If you go there, it'll go right to Sig. So that was great. It was looking for a goal of $7,545. It's at $9,194, so it's fully funded and it's working towards the first stretch goal. 24 days to go. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It is a Forged in the Dark version of his setting, Sig, which is a planar fantasy, and go check it out. It's a very cool setting, and with his tweaks to the Blades in the Dark rules, it's going to be an interesting play. So,
I definitely found his discussion quite fun. It was quite fun and quite interesting, and I like some of the things that Jason's exploring in that rule set. So
yeah, absolutely. I really like the discussion as well.
Good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that means it's time for the feature segment.
Workshop, setting difficulties, making things more difficult at times, making things easier, understanding how difficulty works to make your game a better game. Difficulties in the workshop.
Don't suck.
All right, tonight's topic comes from the forums where Kumano asks...
Well, Phil, that sounds like a Pandas episode.
No, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Anyway, what did Kumano ask us?
Oh yeah, Kumano asked, in a lot of games from Warhammer and D&D through Genesis and in Fate, one of the GM responsibilities is setting difficulty for a check, roll, or test. The game cannot proceed unless the GM sets it. The GM already has unlimited power. When she also gets to set difficulty, she's in total control of the game, pacing, and the PC's lives. What advice do you have on how to set it right and good? In some games, the GM doesn't have to set the difficulty at all. PBTA and Cyrun, to name a few, and it fundamentally changes how the game plays. Suddenly, the GM has one less skill to manage and no longer has the ultimate power. How is playing games with difficulty and with no difficulty different, and can each of them learn something from the other? So, tonight we're going to get into this in a workshop format, looking at setting difficulties in terms of the GM skill, tips on how to set it, and when you might make it easier or harder.
All right, and to get started, Phil, we're going to need some definitions.
Behold! You are in the presence of Definition Panda.
All right, so I do have a few definitions for tonight. Most of these are actually a review, but I always like to make sure our definitions are at the front of our episode to kind of set, set the framework for tonight. So, the first one is going to be check, right? This is when the GM or game requires the player to engage mechanics in order to determine the outcome of some action.
For example, can Grayson pick the lock on the door?
Yep, absolutely. Difficulty level, often a numeric target that is often set by the GM, not always, but often set by the GM, that the player needs to reach or exceed in order to achieve success.
So in this case, things like D&D's difficulty class, or DC, Fate's ladder rating for passive opposition, and the difficulty that occurs in Numenera and other Cypher system games.
The randomizer, which is a object that is used to produce a random number as part of a check.
For example, dice, cards, a spinner, old school chits and cups.
Chits and cups. That's a
chits and cups.
Chits and cups.
That's a Bob.
Chits and cups.
That's a Bob. Yeah. What you call it? I never. I played D&D when there were just dice. Like I started.
I
D&D
actually
when there were
never
dice.
played with chits and cups. I played with dice as well.
Oh, okay. I thought you were a
yeah.
chits and cups guy.
I was around back then,
chits.
But we actually had dice. So
I have my chits and my D&D blue box that they came in. So we did play with those.
If I had
dice are much better.
If I had chits, just to show age, they would have been in one of those waxy Dixie cups.
Yes.
Remember those?
Yep.
All right.
And another randomizer that we talk about are the difficulty dice that occur in Genesis, and we'll talk about those a little bit later.
Cool. Next one is task mitigating mechanics. These are game mechanics which aid the player in succeeding in a check. They most often they come in a form of currency. Not always. There are exceptions to this, but very frequently you'll see this as a type of currency, which we'll talk about currencies in a second.
For example, things like bennies or fate points, experience points in the Cypher system, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Currencies, right? These are resources in the game that are gained and spent, most often by the player. There are, again, notable exceptions to that. And this was like a bonus definition, the combination of gaining and spending resources is also known as an economy. And we've done past shows about that.
There you go. All right, so Jerry, with those definitions set, can you explain how these things come together to form a check and where the difficulty comes in?
So how do difficulties actually work? Difficulties are part of this check. So let's take a look at how the typical check works for a game that uses variable difficulties and then we can get a better feel for its importance. The check is going to have a basic structure.
Yeah, and that structure is going to look something like this, right? The player does something in the narrative that requires a check to be made. Most often, the GM calls for that check, right? So the GM will say, yeah, I'm going to need you to roll for that. All right. Then the GM sets which attribute or skill will be tested. Not always the GM. There are games that definitely don't do this, like Blades in the Dark. The player sets that. But in, like, for instance, in Cypher, the GM would say, like, this is a speed check, this is an intellect check, that kind of thing. And then that's usually communicated to the player, right? The player is aware of which attribute or skill they're using. And then the GM sets the difficulty that needs to be met or exceeded. And that, depending on the game, may or may not be communicated to the player.
And then from there, the player is going to determine their base, including any bonuses they have, skill levels, extra dice, that sort of thing. And then the player is going to engage the randomizer and generate a value. We take the randomizer value, add it to the base that we have, and that's going to determine our total. And if they're present, then the player can also engage any task mitigation resources or currencies like bennies or fate chits or the like.
And after they've done all of that, a final total is determined. The value, that final total, is compared to the difficulty, which then determines what the outcome is, right? Did you exceed the difficulty? Did you not exceed the difficulty? It's in many cases, when we are talking about these systems, these are binary systems, right? Did you exceed the difficulty or not? There are also, again, like 1,000 exceptions where you can exceed it and exceed it with, with more, whatever. But anyway, you are basically looking to see if your total value, how it compares to the difficulty, that's going to determine the outcome. And then the outcome is added back into the narrative. Often the GM will reinterpret that, but players are often also able to do that. And then play resumes.
And then we see that the difficulty is going to come fairly early in this whole process. There are a few ways that difficulties can be determined, however. The first is that the GM sets them, which is going to be our focus for tonight. Sometimes if you're doing a pre-written adventure, the author is going to set the difficulty. There are some cases where the rules set the difficulty, and sometimes the opposition is going to set the difficulty, in like an opposed test or things like that.
Yeah, an opposed test is definitely a check, but often that, like, the GM doesn't have to determine the difficulty. That, like, it's right there, like your sneak versus my perception.
Yep,
exactly.
And like we said, with the rules, those are cases where, like, if you look in a skill section, it might say, like, in order to climb up the slippery wall, it's a DC 15, right? Like, sometimes those are just predefined. And again, like you said, if you're playing a published adventure, the author has done that work in many cases for you. Cool.
All right. So for the difficulties that the GM does set, how does a GM know what value to pick, Phil?
Yeah. So it's going to start by understanding what the designers have determined are the ranges for the game, right? So in nearly every game that uses this kind of task resolution, the rules have a table that will show you the various levels of difficulty, often with a numeric value, right? Like, they're usually, many games, I'm thinking on the fly here, many games couple these two together. They will have like a name for it and then a number.
Yeah. Well, for example, in Numenera, the range is routine, which is 0, to impossible, which is 30. In Fate, that range is terrible, which is -2, to legendary, which is +8. D&D, that range can be 50, or can be 5 to 30 or more. In Savage Worlds, the difficulty is normally 4, or the opposing parry stat, but there are modifiers as well. In the Genesis game system, the difficulty is going to be a set of dice that's going to be determined by the task or the opposition, generally from 1 to 4 dice or 1 to 5 dice or more. And in games like GURPS or Star Frontiers, the difficulty is going to be a modifier to your stat, because in those games, you're rolling under your stat all the time, and it's simply going to be a modifier that scales that number up or down. And of course, there's various other versions of this along the line, but generally, the difficulty is going to be a set number or that's set by the rules.
Yeah, so that range is based on that range is based on the numeric range that the designers have looked at for a given check, right? Yep. Which is going to be a function of the components that go into the base and the randomizer, right? So you might be looking at, okay, the base has a range of this to this. A character has modifiers from this to this, and the randomizer is, 2d6, so that's a range of 2 to 12, right? And then you kind of piece that together.
Exactly. Because, like, for example, in Fate, you typically have stats that are going to range from +0 to +4. But the randomizer is going to generate numbers that are from -4 to +4 with an average of 0. So in general, you can end up with numbers anywhere from -4 to +8 at the end of the day if you have +4 and you roll a +4. But generally, you're going to have a 0, so the GM's got to assume that your results are going to be whatever your stat value is.
Unless I'm rolling, and then it's -1. Statistically, I roll a -1 higher than a 0.
Feels good at that.
Yeah.
Players love when I GM Fate. Okay. So
yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Again, I've never heard players complain about it. Some games will also then into this factor task mitigation effects, or not, right? So like some games, like Numenera very specifically does not factor task mitigation into its difficulties, though it expects that players will use them. So what that means is that like when they build the range is made for rolling a die, a d20 in this case, but understands that players can lower the difficulty by using their task mitigations.
Mm-hmm.
So in most games, there will be, when you have this chart, right, of the like super simple to the like drastically impossible, there will be one rating that will be the quote standard difficulty or average difficulty.
Mm-hmm. And this is most one more time, Misdirected Mark, word scramble. This is most often the average value. In Numenera, the standard number is 6. In Fate, was that?
No, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, in Fate, the average is going to be a +1. In D&D, it's going to be a DC of 10. So, using that range of standard value, the GM will be instructed to make things that are harder or to be higher than the average things, and make things easier to be lower than average.
Absolutely.
And I took Phil's
line.
Yeah,
no, it's fine. No, it's fine. I mean, that's exactly, like, that's the idea, is that by creating that standard line, like the quote average difficulty, it's the first place where the GM makes a judgment value when they look at a problem and say, like, is this easier than average or harder than average, right? It tells them which side of the table to go towards.
Yep.
All right, so now we come to Cubano's question. How do we, as GM, do a good job of selecting this value?
And this is, like, look, this is, there's a trick to this, right? Because if you don't do this well, it has an effect in the game, right? So set all of your difficulties too low, every check is easy, the players accumulate success after success, and they can actually get bored with that. Set the difficulties too high, and the opposite occurs. The players fail roll after roll, and then hopelessness sets in.
Yeah.
Which often then leads to passive-aggressive behavior. Like, it has been my experience that once players find something to be hopeless, they start to become obnoxious about it. Right? A good
example was the Torg game I played, where the players figured out very quickly that our chance of success was something like 14%. And so we just stopped taking chances on anything, little girl's father falls off the boat in the shark-infested water. Well, have fun being an orphan kind of thing.
Right.
And, there's the bad guy's lair where we're going to head in the opposite direction. It ended up being a game because if you have that situation where the difficulties are too high, the players don't play that. But the flip side is also true. They just don't, if you make it too easy, then there's no challenge and the players stop really caring about what's going on for a lot of games.
You'll wind up, and I'll use a term that we have used on the show before. If the difficulties are too low, players will start chasing the curve. Right? Like, so the things that should be, kind of hard that aren't, then they'll go and try to do even wilder things. Looking for, like, oh, if I can do that and that's an easy difficulty, then I'm totally going to try to, jump this Mack truck Dukes of Hazzard style. Because, why not? So you get kind of a chasing, like, I call it chasing the curve. It's a kink term. But you wind up starting to chase the curve because of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So understanding that setting difficulties has an effect on the game, when it comes to setting difficulties, we got to look at a number of factors, right? Like, and this is why this is tricky. And I think, and I think this is why this is such a good question. And as soon as I saw it, I wanted to do it as a topic because it never occurred to me that how do you know how to set difficulties? Like I do it because I've played like a bajillion games and I'm old. Like I'm old and crusty. So like, you know, setting difficulties has been a thing I've been doing forever. So I don't really think about it too much. I just kind of like, where's your table? Where's your standard? Okay.
You've been GM so much, you've probably set a million different difficulties.
I mean, over time, sure. I'm sure I have, right? I'm sure I have it some like in total, right? So I don't really think about it, but it was really good to have to actually stop and when putting this together, like think like, oh yeah, like what do you take into account for this? And so let's talk about some of those things that factor into how to make this decision.
Well, the first one is going to be the rules themselves. You know, the first question is going to be, do the rules give any rubric or algorithm to set the difficulty? For example, in Numenera, it says, look at the difficulty, says, and what would it take for the average person to succeed? Not the average character, but the average person, because characters are often exceptional.
Exactly. In fact, what it tells you is, and I really like this because this was eye-opening for me when I was reading the Numenera rules, was that you set it to the difficulty for an average person in that world. So you're just like, oh, that thing, well, that's just impossible for the average person. And then the idea is the players have a whole bunch of things that can then lower the difficulty. And the more powerful the player is, the higher the tier, the more of those things they can bring to bear. And so things that are impossible for an average person shift for the players down the line. But what happens is if you didn't make that differentiation in Numenera and you started saying like, oh, this thing, well, that's average for the characters and the characters are fully loaded to bear with all of these things to reduce the task, then it reduces it down to 0 and those are automatic no rolls. And the game kind of then loses a little bit of its randomness and excitement.
Or potentially they don't use those resources and they're sitting on all of them.
Sure.
And you don't have the flow of currency that the game should normally have.
Sure, but even the free ones, right? Like like skill and assets, like will still pull it down like a couple notches. But you're right, like the spendy ones, like effort is, you know, but those things have like that's a huge difference in the game. And so the rules do a nice job of giving that rubric and telling you this is like start here and make those things. Okay. The next one it ties into that as well, which is look for examples in the rules. Most of these games that have these systems usually have a bunch of examples that show how different situations and how in the example which difficulty they picked. And they're doing that they're doing that to teach you by example.
The next one is going to be look for advice and guidelines from the designer themselves. Some games are going to have the GMing section that tells you how best to set difficulties. For example, both Fate and Numenera have sections on giving advice on difficulty settings. Yeah,
I mean, it's great. Like when you get to the back of Numenera, there's like a section from Monty that's like, okay, let's talk about the mechanics of the game. And basically your job as GM is to set difficulties and like gives you like a whole breakdown of it. And it's really helpful. And then Fate does the exact same thing. All right, so the next thing you need to be aware of is the player's ranges, right? So knowing the numeric range of a character, right? Knowing the character's ranges, you can roughly generate how easy or hard a certain difficulty is with or without task mitigations, right? Like if I know that Bob's got, you know, like a +3 skill in Fate, like I know that if I assign something a +6, that's probably going to need a Fate point, right? But if I assign it at a 3, I'm reasonably confident Bob will make this roll. Okay. And this little bit, and exactly, right? So that little bit of knowledge helps you kind of figure out what's easy and hard for the player, and based on where they are on the power curve of the game.
The next is going to be the effect of your task mitigation resources, your bennies and your Fate points and the like. And knowing what the task mitigation resources the players have, and how they affect their range is going to let you know what is reachable with a spend. And this is something you see most games actually want you to have that economy transfer back and forth. And that becomes really important because, just like Phil said, knowing that they have a fate point to spend means that he can set that difficulty at a 4 or a 5 and still make it reasonable for the players to accomplish if they spend their fate points.
Yep, which dovetails right into the next one, which is the economy of the task mitigation resource. In many cases, these resources are an economy, right? They're meant to be earned and spent. And so knowing where the players are, economically, will let you know what you can and can't do. Like, are they flush with the resource? Like, if they are, like, you can crank up some difficulties because they can buy their way out of them. Or are they, are they scarce? In which case, if you do make a higher difficulty, it's going to create a harder decision point for them. It also separately, because we talked about economies in a previous episode, it also is a prompt that you need to start doing something to inject more, more resources into the economy.
Yeah.
Yeah. If only our government could understand that concept. Sorry. I'm back on track.
Right now.
I'm back on track.
Now, the next thing that we talk about is where in the story and stakes is the difficulty. Depending on where you are in the story, the stakes for the check may or may not be worth making players spend for success. Or it could be something that's like a clue gathering part of the mystery where you want finding clues to be easier. And that makes a big difference because, if you want the players, if you're early on in the game, you don't want to necessarily load them down. And this is one of the things that the game Aegon actually does have working for it, is that the difficulties are random, but the randomizer is based on where in the story you are. It starts out low at, I think, like a D4, and it eventually gets up to like a D12 or something like that to set your difficulties. And so the further along you are in the game, the higher the chance that the difficulty is going to be there, and the more resources the players may have to spend to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And that also will do something for the next one, which is
the tone of the table. So you can check, and again, we've talked about this, and I think actually we talked about this in a Panda episode about reading the table. But also in the Pandas episode, we talked about the inherent difficulty of reading a table. But the tone of the table is also a factor in picking out your difficulties, right? So if the tone of the table is really somber, right? Like you've hit a few downbeats or they've had a few setbacks, and you've kind of lost any kind of, energy or momentum at the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
A slightly easier difficulty will start building some successes. Right?
Yep.
That can perk a table back up. If a table is really energetic, right? Like they've been crushing check after check, hitting them with like a higher difficulty kind of raises the stakes a little, right? Shake things up a little. Like these are kind of beat, these are kind of beat analysis things, right? Like maybe it's time to change it up, ease off on a difficulty or raise up a difficulty, just to shake up the table a little.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in any given check, one or more of these things could be relevant, which is what makes setting difficulties both a skill and an art, right? And I hate that because it's always a cop-out, but in this case, it's actually true. It's a skill when you are taking into consideration things like the rules, ranges, task mitigations, and resource economies. And it is an art when you are taking into consideration where you are in the story and the tone of your table. And all of those things matter. Now, as a GM, you have the choice of which ones of those you want to engage, right? You might be a referee style GM, right? A little more OSR, where story and tone of the table aren't a factor in your decisions. That's up to you, right? Like that's your GMing style. You could be like, I'm playing this thing OSR. I care about the mechanical parts of this. I'm not factoring in the story parts of this. Or you could be, a very story-centric GM who is actually working both the story and the tone at the table. And you are going to lean heavily on those things. Like those things might be more important than some of the more mechanical parts of it. That's totally up to you. That's going to be your play style. That's going to be how the game is played, and your group preferences. So don't, while we listed them all, understand that not all of them always get engaged, and you may have preferences for certain ones.
Yeah, that's a great point, Phil. So knowing what we know about difficulties and where they fit in mechanics for making a check, What do difficulties do in a game?
Well, the difficulties are the mechanical component of the game, as we described above, but they're more than that. They are meta information about the game. And as such, they're going to have the ability to evoke reactions and emotions in the players themselves.
Yeah, like low difficulties are a signal to players, right? A lower tension, a feeling of confidence, a hint to conserve resources.
Mm-hmm. And the higher difficulties are going to signal to players that this is a much higher tension situation. It's going to add more uncertainty to success, so that successes become more important to them. And it's going to signal them that there's a need to expend resources.
Mm-hmm. And unknown difficulties are also a signal to players, right? It creates a certain amount of tension, at least a transient amount of tension, because they're not sure where that difficulty is. It does put some uncertainty on success, because when players don't know what the difficulty is, they can't do the quick math. Every player who plays in this style game can do the quick math and figure out, like, is this, can I hit a DC 15? Can I hit a DC 25? Or what roll would I need to hit a 15? What roll would I need to hit a 25? But when you don't know what that DC is, you can't do that math. And now instantly you have some uncertainty. And that often then gets you kind of ready to expend some resources.
Which means that behind just the setting of the difficulty of the challenge, the difficulties are going to be helping to set the tone of the game itself. It's a signal to the players different tones that are going on in the game throughout the adventure. So on the art side of this GMing responsibility, the GM can consider the tone and difficulties and what they're conveying themselves. So the GM can use this to change the beats in any particular session.
Yeah, so if you've had a series of easy difficulties, for getting everyone into the compound, and then suddenly, they set off a trap, and then you just like jack up all the difficulties, right? You've injected tension into the story. Conversely, if the players have been fighting their way out of the compound, spending resources, taking damage, they're worn down, right? They're beat up. Finding out that the difficulty for the last check to get onto the, escape boat is actually pretty average. That will help like drop tension, right? They'll be like, oh, thank God, and then make their roll.
And another thing that the difficulties can do is they can be used to modulate how quickly the characters are going to move through the plot, especially ones that require a lot of checks to proceed.
Yeah. So for instance, if you're playing a game with mysteries, where the difficulty, so if you're playing a game with mysteries where the difficulty for collecting clues is low, it speeds the characters through clue gathering, right? Like through the clue gathering part of the story, and moves the game into assembling the clues and figuring the mystery out.
Yep.
Or conversely, if you're on a wilderness journey where the difficulty to move through the snowy mountains is high, it makes like every hex gained a battle, right? And it makes the travel slow and arduous, which, might be the tone you're trying to hit at the table.
All right. That's going to be our deep dive into difficulties. I apologize for my coughing. We're going to take a break, but before we do, Bob's going to tell us about another show on the network.
All right. Going to talk about Zhang Hustle again. Train alongside fellow students Eric Farmer and Eli Kurtz in Zhang Hustle. Eric and Eli make their kung fu stronger by watching wuxia. Wow. Misdirected Mark word scrambles all over the place tonight. Wuxia films. Then they discuss how to apply their observations to game design. If you haven't checked this out, you should. It's a good time. A lot of fun. Check out Zhang Hustle. Normally we would go into the chat room, but since we're doing a radio-only program tonight, we are not live and there is no chat room.
Does anyone have any intervening, like any thoughts on the first part of the segment?
I got a quick question for you. Where do you think a game, when we talk about different kinds of difficulty things, where do you think a game like MERP or Rollmaster falls into it? Where you're rolling under or over, sometimes you're going to be rolling stats, but you're going to be always rolling on charts. And the chart's going to slide up and down.
So see, the thing with the charts is it depends on who sets the column that you're going to roll it, right? Yep. So if the GM sets the column, right? So this would apply to face rip as well, right? So if the GM sets what column you roll in, then it's very much this, like everything we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because I can pick a column to the left, which is traditionally, I'm going to pause for a second for our younger gamers who may never have played a table based system before. I'll use Face Rip as an example. So in a table-based system, and these are very much 80s tech, I haven't seen too many modern games that use this mechanic anymore, but it was very prevalent in the 80s with Face Rip, one of the editions of Gamma World, and a few other games. But in this case, what you have is you have a table where the columns are some sort of increasing difficulty, where the leftmost column is easy and the rightmost column is very hard. And then your rows are ranges of dice values, which in Face Rip is percentile. So starting with, 1 and going up over 100, because often there's bonuses and stuff involved. And then the intersection of the difficulty column and your roll produces a result. And in Face Rip, that result is one of 4 results, white being a failure, green being a low-level success, yellow being a better success, and red being a great success. And then in other games, it might be a letter value or something like that. But the intersection of difficulty column plus row of, what you rolled creates a value. So now going back to your thing, how you pick the column, would determine if everything that we said here is applicable. And if part of it is that, for different checks, the GM picks the column, then yes. If the rule was, hey, when you go to do a thing, you just roll the column for your, if you're going to sneak, you just roll the column for the value you have in sneak, then the GM isn't really setting anything, right? And that's more like what we're going to talk about in the second half. That's more like a game like Powered by the Apocalypse, where the GM doesn't factor in a difficulty.
Right. Okay. I thought that was an interesting one. I didn't know where to put it in our little discussion.
No, it's good. It's interesting. I also want to mention, like, Star Frontiers is interesting in that. So in Star Frontiers, you have a base value to Star Frontiers for our youngins is a 1980s TSR. Those are the guys that own D&D before WotC. TSR sci-fi game that was percentile based. It is a peer of Gangbusters. If you're a listener of the show, you remember us playing Gangbusters a couple years ago.
But much better written.
It is a much better written version. But in that case, you have a percentile, which is like your base to do a thing, and especially in combat, right? You have a base number, and then what the GM has is like a shitload of tables with a whole bunch of modifiers that stack up onto that base value. So like if you are shooting after aiming, add +10. If you are shooting from a moving vehicle, -20. All of those things. And basically, and this is the reason why I've never, as a GM, enjoyed that system, is that the latency on them can be really long. Right? Because like, especially in combat, because you're like trucking through, depending on the game, like lists of all these things, like, does this apply? Does this apply? Does this apply? Does this apply? And again, system mastery will get you to the point where you don't have to actually consult the list, but early on, you will be looking at this fucking list all the time, and then doing all the little maths, and then rolling and trying to roll under. Again, not my favorite style system. But again, it was a very prevalent 80s, 90s kind of tech. And you even see a little of it today in, what's the game with the space octopi and Cthulhu shit. This is where we need a chat room, folks.
I was gonna say Traveler.
Nope.
Space Octopi.
Nope. It's the transhuman game.
Eclipse Phase.
Yes, thank you. Eclipse Phase.
Okay.
Yeah, Eclipse Phase has a percentile system. This is one of the reasons why I was like, I have a bias against percentile systems. Call of Cthulhu is a percentile system, and I just barely make it through that one.
That one has a few mitigating factors though, because it's borrowed a lot from other game systems to make it a little better.
That one has the advantage of 7 generations of fixing that game, which
Yeah.
is totally
Yeah.
fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dunking on it. Like,
No.
it's been smart enough over the years to be like, I think we're going to incorporate a couple new rules here.
What's funny is that people who have played Call of Cthulhu First Edition would take about 4 minutes to figure out how to play 7th Edition. They are not that they're so similar to each other. They did a really good job of keeping the core of the game, but making it a better, because First Edition is just rough.
Yeah, and the enhancements they made to it actually make the game, to me, more fun.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people.
Cool. See, look,
That's
we made
really
our own little break.
There you go.
All right. Okay.
All right. So now we're going to continue our discussion about difficulties by going around the table with a few questions, starting with this one, Phil.
All right. So returning to our original question from the start of the show, what advice do you have for how to set difficulties right and good?
I'll start. I think that the first thing I would do is look at, like we've said before, the tone and setting, where we are in the story, but also look at what is it your players should be able to do and what kind of game is it. Something that has always frustrated me with games, and as much as I enjoyed playing it, Pathfinder was guilty of this, was that as the players went on, the difficulties just kept getting more difficult. You never encountered something simple like, okay, yes, you are a level 10 master thief. Here's a lock you should be able to pick easily. Like, as soon as you become a master lock, every burgomeister in the place has a difficulty 30 lock on their thing for some reason.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think that I figure what's right and good is going to be, and I'm not thrilled with that term, but what I like for picking difficulties is basically what I want the players to accomplish in this scene, how easy do I want them to be able to accomplish it, and what makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if they're going to break into the baker's house, that lock is never going to be super difficult, unless he's a really wealthy baker. And in some cases...
Right. Wait, why does this baker have a DC 30 lock on his, on his bakery?
Exactly. And the same thing with, you know, action scenes or discussions or so on. And sometimes you set them higher based on where the story is. You know, if you're trying to make this into a will they, won't they, and we get to that romance seduction situation, you maybe want to set that a little bit higher. But I never just try to set it arbitrarily. I don't just try to say, okay, you know, yes, I want this to go on, but there's no logical reason for this character to have this thing. Well, then the players are probably going to succeed. Let them do it. But I'm also a GM who I have no trouble short-circuiting adventure in the middle of it if the players actually succeed at stopping the bad guy in scene 2 out of 10, and we'll just move on with something else after that. I don't want to see difficulties that are just set high because that's what the game wants you to have, as opposed to what the story is. And because that can lead to players getting frustrated and not trusting, that leads back to that don't trust the GM thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because they start realizing they can't trust the game world because the game world is not going to be logical for them. It's going to always be set for character levels, and that's a problem.
To me, that was 4th edition, right? 4th edition, like the numbers just got like more and more bonkers, but you really always were in the same, you were like always operating in the same range of die rolls.
Yeah, as the characters went up in power, the difficulties went up, and it really just, it was like stasis across the board.
Yeah, like you were always rolling for about the same number on the die.
It's something I've talked about even with 5th edition, which I enjoy 5th edition, but one of my complaints is that trying to create encounters with it is the fact that as you get higher level, the NPCs aren't built like characters are. And so you're encountering 3 guardsmen and they're all going to do 3d6 plus 10 damage because that's the damage level that a villain at that level should do, even though they're just using the same spear that you're using.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense. And it makes it sometimes difficult. If your difficulties are arbitrary, it's going to make it difficult for players to make logical choices in situations.
Mm-hmm.
And then they either get paranoid or they burn all of their resources. I run Savage Worlds, and we have one player who's famous for burning all of his resources in like the first 20 minutes of the game. He's just out of bennies because he doesn't know what the difficulty is going to be. That's a playing style he has, and it's part of the fun of it. But I've seen players do that for the other reason. They don't trust what's going on, so they think that every roll that's made has to be difficult. So that's what I do. How about you, Bob?
I'm gonna do what he said. I agree with everything you said there. I will put again further emphasis on if the situation warrants it, don't be afraid to lower a difficulty, even to the point of don't make a check. If
well, we're gonna get to that question.
Yeah,
that's our second question.
That's a little foreshadowing. But yeah.
I'll add one more thing in here. If I have a player who has just had a crap day in real life, and for the first hour and a half of the game has not made a single frickin' dice roll, I may drop a difficulty for them just so they get a success. And I won't tell them why. I'll make something up as they go. I'm going to add that in. I will make up a reason for why it's easier, but sometimes you just gotta let them succeed.
Absolutely.
Because nobody unless they like playing the always a suboptimal choice character. Sometimes people just need to win once in a while.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I will.
So,
I'll
back to you, Phil.
I'll just, you know what? I'll tack onto a bunch of the same things that you're saying. But I'll start with the lowering the roll for tone and momentum.
Yes.
So there are games where I totally do that, and there are games where I don't do that. So, for instance, I don't do that in DCC, right? I take the spirit of DCC, like let the dice fall where they may, kind of thing, pretty much to heart. And there are task mitigations, right? There's luck, but also, as OSR-ish as DCC looks, dying is actually kind of fucking hard in that game. Dropping to 0 hit points isn't hard. Dying in that game is hard. So I often don't in that game, because I think that's kind of an unwritten part of the social contract. That game just does what it does. But in many, many other games, if a player is in a slump rolling dice or that kind of thing, I have and will mess with difficulties. And like Jerry said, if it's a game where I have to say the difficulty out loud, I will come up with a reason why this is somehow easier. And it's fine, right? Like, I get that that's not everyone's style, but I totally use that tool in my toolbox from time to time.
Yep.
When I need it, I use it.
Because we're there to have fun.
Yeah. The other one I will use, because we're going to get to the question about not rolling in a second, but if I think we need to have a roll and we're in a part of the story where I really want just things to move along, I will often just make the difficulties easier because I'm more interested in, do your thing. All right, cool. Let's get, we really need to get over here, right? So we'll use it that way. Now, to build off of something you said earlier in your description, Jerry, I am a huge fan, when I can do it, to have internal logic and consistency. If the average check is like I'm just going to arbitrarily use a number. If the average check is a 10 and you have done nothing but piss this guy off that you're trying to talk to, I am going to move it up, right? I'm just going to be like, no way, this check's a 15 because this guy hates your guts.
Yeah.
Conversely, if you spent the evening buying this guy drinks and it's time to, hit him up for some info, I'm going to drop it. I'm going to be like, yeah, no, you totally earned yourself an easier difficulty because you did the work narratively. So I guess what that pulls into is, besides internal logic, to me, narrative positioning is a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. I have trouble. That's why I have trouble with games that don't allow narrative positioning.
Yeah, I'm with you, right? One of the things I really like in Numenera is that as the GM, my job is to set a difficulty, but I'm also allowed to raise the difficulty when setting it. I can make it harder than normal if the circumstances warrant it, right? Normally this would be, an average climb, but, there is goo running down the walls. I'm bumping this up to, and then, in that game, the players then, with their narrative positioning, begin to chip that number back down. But I like, and this is one, for all the things that I don't always like about Blades in the Dark games, Forge in the Dark games, one of the things I love in Forge in the Dark games is that the player picks the approach, and then the GM tells you which level it's going to be based on, I'm wrecking this, and I'm like, that is not the best way to handle this. Wreck is not the best way to handle this. This is going to be risky. Yeah. I love that interplay. It adds a little latency, but I love the idea that, look, some of these choices on your sheet are better than other ones.
Yep.
And if you're going to take a suboptimal one, then I'm also going to assign you the suboptimal condition, like, or outcome from this thing.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna wreck your way into this compound quietly. I'm calling that risky, if I'm even allowing the roll at all.
And that actually creates, to me, an interesting choice point for myself as the player, where I'm like, okay, well, the most obvious thing to do here is to use skirmish. Well, I have 0 dots in skirmish, so I'm going to have 2 dice take the worst of the 2.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I can push myself to get the extra die, I can roll 1 die flat. Or I can decide, well, screw it, I'm going to use wreck, which is the suboptimal choice, get my normal two dice, but it's going to be riskier, and the outcome is going to be a lesser effect because I'm not using the optimal choice. So now I've got to sit and I've got to weigh that. I'm like, if I roll 2 dice and take the lowest, that could go poorly. But if I do it this way and roll 2 dice regular, I could still have a different kind of poor. So like it's a fun pivot.
Yeah, it's some cool calculus that goes on.
Yeah.
And likewise, as a GM, like if you totally sell me on the approach, like then I'm like, okay, like go ahead, I'll give you an average roll for that. Like, let's see what you got. Like, so I do like to kind of wrap this up. Like Jerry, I have a little rubric in my head, right? Like, and so I'm trying to keep some sort of internal consistency going, and I'm okay pushing numbers up and down. But then, much like Jerry said, I will also play the table of players as well. Like if I think I need to like bump down a difficulty because, Bob's rolled, 7 failures in a row in a game that doesn't make failures interesting, I'm going to find a way to get that difficulty down and try to build a little, try to break that slump. All right. Cool.
Good stuff.
Jerry, we hinted at this a few minutes ago. What's our second question?
So, where does not allowing a roll or not requiring a roll come into play with all this?
So these are 2 important things, right? Not allowing a roll means that the check can't occur.
Yeah.
And not requiring a roll means the check just succeeds.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be from my perspective, the not allowing a roll, that one's a little more of a situation, a super situational one for me, but way less GMing experience. The not requiring a roll, that one to me, that's like leaning into something Jerry's going to say. If it's not interesting to make a roll, what's the point? If there's no significant difference to whether they make a roll or not, like what happens with this outcome? If all you're doing is throwing dice in a tray, why do it?
Right.
So make it mean something. If you need to do this in such a way that pick the lock so quietly that the guard that's right around the corner won't hear you. You better be rolling dice and you better be doing it because that's going to make an impact on the game. But if you come to the place and it like you're standing outside the gate of the gate of the keep, the gate of the keep, and literally the whole adventure is behind this door, then you better let the players in that friggin' door. Don't make them sit there and roll and roll and roll. Oh, you keep failing to check to break the door down. Meanwhile, in the other room, everybody's playing fucking Paranoia and having a good time and laughing their asses off. And we're standing in the courtyard going, what the fuck? We can't get the door open for an hour.
Bob is having some game trauma from the 90s.
Don't let them roll that. Just open the damn door.
I ran that Paranoia game where everybody was laughing.
And I was like in despair at the other table. Yeah, that's all I've got to say on that.
I'm gonna, what? We're all gonna build up on Jerry's answer here. It's not gonna leave Jerry much meat on the bone.
That's okay. That's okay.
But I have also taken to heart the only ask for rolls when both outcomes are interesting, right? So, if succeeding is interesting, but there's nothing interesting about failure, don't roll. Like it's not worth it. Now, my caveat to that is you can change the stakes, right? So you can change the stakes to be like, look, you got a thief. It's like a master lockpick. He's gonna like break into the baker's place. I may not have him make the I'd be like, look, you don't need to make the pick lock roll. Like, the lock is not your problem here, right?
Right.
Your problem is I need a stealth check.
Yep.
I need framing the stakes of a scene is also part of that, right? Like, if I want there to be a roll, then I will find better stakes to make a roll around because I want success and failure to be interesting. But like, literally, if I cannot, when a player's like, I want to do this thing, in my head, I'm like, if they fail ... and I draw a blank, then I'm like, like, yeah, you don't need to roll that. And I always like, you can always tell like players who've played in either older or different systems, they'll say something, pick up their dice and start rolling. And I'm like, whoa, like, don't roll yet. Like, what are you up to here? Like, you may not even need a roll. That, like, you know, like somebody will be like, oh, I'm going to go find out information about like where this guy is. And like, they pick up their dice and I'm like, yeah, you just like, you find out. Like, like, that's not interesting. Like, we need to cut to the scene where you find the guy. Like, finding the guy is not interesting here. So yeah, the not requiring a roll, I think, is very much what Jerry had written down here. The not allowing a roll, I try very hard to not have to do this to a player. There are times where a player will say something and I'll be like, nope, that like cannot, like, that just doesn't work. Like, I'm going to use my dagger to break open like the, you know, the armor on this armor transport. And I'm like, no, like, no, like that, like the world doesn't work like that. And I think that while I don't like using it, I think it's necessary because there is a thing where, and this is a thing I love, right? So this is one of the reasons I love DCC. This is one of the reasons I love Numenera and a number of other games, is where I want players to think outside the box, right?
Yes.
I want players to come up with some interesting solutions to problems. I encourage players to come up with interesting solutions to a problem, but there needs to be a cap on the top of that where like, that's too wacky to be allowed. Otherwise,
it's just not feasible.
Well, that's it. Because if you allow a roll and your game has a thing like a 20 is always a success, then like somebody stabs the troop transport with their dagger and blows it up.
My halfling is gonna try and grapple the Trask.
Right. And it's like, well, roll, haha, 20, suck it. Right. Like, no, like that's not how this works, right? You look like Daffy Duck.
If you want to play that game, you got to play a totally different game.
That's like in Tune, right?
Yeah.
No wacky idea is too wacky in Tune, right? Like, just roll.
Yeah, Tune was made for whack.
Right.
Now,
but like for Numenera or like another game that's rooted in some sort of internal reality, there is a point where you say like, that is too much of a grab. Like, that's you're trying, like, you're reaching beyond what's possible.
Stretching.
I got to just put a no.
Yeah.
Like, I got to just put a no on that.
Yep.
But I will sometimes try to, like, instead of just giving a hard no, I'll be like, look, you can't do that. Like you can't blow up the troop transport with your combat knife. But on a successful roll, you could wreck the coolant line and and do this. Like, I will offer the alternative. Like, I see what you're going for here. You want to injure this troop transport, but no, I can't let you blow it up with, unless it's Rifts and you have your MDC knife, but sorry, shouldn't even.
Less said about Rifts about it.
Let's not talk about that. So, I will try to offer this is as close as I can take you to the thing that you're trying to get to. And a lot of times players will be like, oh, cool, I'll do that. Like, that's cool.
Yeah.
So yes. So I do think not allowing a roll is important, especially when you're playing with games that have a lot of imaginative, like, narrative positioning, because some people will narrative too far. Like, is that also on Fire? No, it's not.
No.
Is there any way I can get Foyer into this equation?
Yeah.
Bob remembers we played a we played a Gen Con game where the player had they got a bonus if it had to do with fire, and literally every check they did, they tried to include fire in it. Like they went to charm someone and they used like a candle to make like a interesting display of like light or something, and the GM was like, oh, okay, cool. And then they like, once they sensed that, they attempted like every time
using my fiery disposition. No,
it's like no, just stop. Like stop.
That was D&D Next. That was the playtest for 5e that I ran.
Was that D&D Next?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, that was because that was trying to get advantage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. It's painful.
All right, what do you got to say about this particular one, Jerry?
Well, I'm going to start with a wise man, or at least wiser than me, once told me, roll when failure is interesting. Yep. And I'll caveat that to say, roll when success is variable and interesting. And if I get to a point where I'm not going to require a roll, but the player seems to want to do something, you know, like, oh, I was going to roll for that to see. I'll just turn it over to them. I said, so tell me what happens when you do X. You know,
yes.
You unlock the lock. Tell me how you do it. Sometimes players want to roll because they think if they roll well, they'll get to do something really cool. I'll just let them do the really cool thing.
Yeah, give them the narrative weight to describe it however they want.
Yep. And the same thing with the when don't you let them roll. Yeah, if somebody just keeps constantly pulling something like, you know, I'm going to use fire to do this and that, and it's impossible, or I'll ask them, so tell me how you're going to pull that off before they even make the roll. I'm going to grapple the Tarrasque. Tell me how you grapple tell me how you're going to do that first. Make them give me, you know, in 100 words or less, tell me how you're going to grapple the Tarrasque. And if they're like, well, I'm just going to grapple it, I'm going to roll it if I roll 20. I'm like, no, okay. Or critical success. Yes, you've got the Tarrasque's leg. What are you going to do with it? You know,
yeah. It keeps walking,
you know,
and you're
it keeps walking. You know,
you're clinging to his leg.
You know. I mean, I'm not going to be the complete dick GM who does things like, you know, yes, you grapple the underside of its foot as it steps forward, or, you know, I use my knife to try to stop the tube transport. Yes, as it grinds you under its treads, it comes to a stop as your bones jam the gears. I'm not going to pull that on them. But I do like to do the explain to me, because sometimes they're rolling for the wrong thing.
Uh-huh.
They have an idea.
Yep.
They have an idea, and because of the way the game is written, this is the only way they can think mechanically to do it.
Yes.
And if they say, so what are you actually planning? Well, you know, I want to use my knife to cut the coolant levels. Or I'm going to tear off my shirt and use the knife to jam it into the exhaust so that the engine chokes out. Great, make that roll, see what happens.
Uh-huh.
And in that case, unless they roll horribly, I'm going to give them that mitigating, even if it's a yes, no, oh, I only rolled an 8, I need a 10. No, you slow it down. It chokes. It doesn't stop it, but you know, you choke it. Modern games have taught me that even binary game systems, if they come close, I'm going to give them a partial success. I kind of run every game now like it's Dungeon World, which frustrates some people, but can be a lot of fun.
You know, some people just are never going to be happy with that, but to me,
and that's okay.
It's for most of the people playing that game, it's probably more fun that way. Mm-hmm. For the really hardcore people, I get it, you know, but
I very rarely these days play with hardcore rules lawyer players, which isn't a bad thing. Those players are all great together. They have a lot of fun. Yeah. Just not my game style. Exactly. And so, and but as a GM, I also try to explain that to them at the table before we sit down. Yeah. Listen, I'm going to do this. We're going to have semi-binary results. And if you come close, you know, we're going to have some mitigating things. So try things, because I'm always in favor, like Phil, as somebody who runs a lot of Savage Worlds, I will sometimes hand out lots of bennies. Because one thing I've noticed is that the more bennies players have, the more likely they are to do stupid things or creative things or things that are just completely illogical.
Creativity for a lot of people is dependent on the in-game logic. And if you've got the ability to try these wacky things, you're going to be way more prone to do it.
Creative things.
You got a big stack of bennies in front of you. And you're like, all right, let's try this. Here's a benny. You know?
Yep.
If you don't have any bennies, you're like,
Conversely, yes. Once I've run out of bennies, I become very conservative in combat. Yeah. Like, tell me about the cover in this scene. Like, if I have like 12 bennies, I'm like, I jump on top of the moving vehicle, shooting both guns out, you know, John Wick style. And then, you know, when I get down to like one benny, I'm like, so did you say there's a barrel I could hide behind here?
Excellent.
Like,
I crouch behind the barrel and I
yes,
only peek out long enough to.
Right. gonna aim very carefully. Yeah.
I've got to go back to one of our local gamers here, Corey Atwell, has my favorite quote from a Savage Worlds game ever, which is he came to the game late, and so he wasn't there when we handed out bennies. And I'm about 20 minutes into the game when somebody's like, "Oh no, Corey, we forgot to give you bennies." He just looked over. He's like, "That's okay. I'll just role play harder." And I'm like, because role playing is one of the ways you can get bennies, and I'm like, wow, all right. I'm like,
that is the Corey I think it is, right?
Yeah, it is the Corey you think it is. Yes,
Corey is a very acquired taste, but
that sounds like a Corey thing. Yeah,
it is very much a Corey thing. But that is a beautiful line.
Yep.
So with that, Bob, you want to tell us the third question?
Let's do question 3. How is playing games with difficulty and with no difficulty different? And can each of them learn something from the other?
Let's define what he means by difficulty and no difficulty first.
Sure. So let's just do like an easy one, right? Like Fate versus Powered by the Apocalypse, right? So Powered by the Apocalypse moves do not have a difficulty, right? It is always roll plus stat.
Yep.
There's nothing that makes them go up and down. The most you might get is help, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you might be carrying a -1 from a previous move.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to play get help.
What's that?
I don't want to play get help.
Yeah.
It's degrading.
So PBTA, there are no difficulties in the game. You just, when it's time to roll a move, you roll the move. And in Fate, obviously, as we've been talking about all through the night, for passive resistance, not rolling against like another character, but for passive resistance, the GM's going to pick that difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay. So like, what do you learn from them? Right. So in PBTA, because I'm gonna focus on PBTA.
Go ahead.
In PBTA, success and failure are almost less like there is a less clear-cut difference between success and failure in PBTA, because when you get a 6- on a move and a GM, and GM takes a move, that doesn't necessarily mean you failed.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can I may let you pick the lock. I'm also just going to take this move over here and and let that play out, right? Like I'm going to show you off-screen badness.
And for some people that is a super hard concept to grasp. They think, "Oh, I rolled a 4, I failed." Not necessarily.
I have to say that a lot when I play con games with people who haven't played PBTA before. They'll be like, "Oh, 6-, I failed." I'm like, I'll be the determination of whether you failed or not.
You may not have failed. You just made things more interesting.
Yeah.
For our listeners who have not played PBTA, please explain the mechanic of all of the Powered by the Apocalypse.
Sure. So PBTA move, in a nutshell, goes like this. When you go to do a thing, roll plus a stat. On a 10+, you get what you want and possibly a little bit more. On a 7 and 9, you are going to get what you want, but with the following conditions. This is like a partial success. And on a 6-, the GM, sometimes it'll tell you what happens, but often the GM will take a move. And the GM basically gets to decide the outcome. So that is like the gist of a PBTA move. So there's no difficulty, right? Like the only thing, you just roll plus stat.
Yep.
So in those games, right, like there's no tension in terms of like, oh boy, like every time you make the move, you're rolling like a known quantity, right? Like, and the game is skewed to hit 7 to 9s, right? Like, your stat will be the influencer on how much above 7 to 9 you're going to go, but 2d6 comes out at a average of 6, right? 7, average of 7, right? Which is the 7 to 9 move. And if you have a +1 in a stat, that's an 8.
Yep.
Even if you have the +2 in a stat, that's a 9, right? Like, so on average, the bell curve of that game pushes you into that middle band, which means that if you pick the lock on the baker's door or you pick the lock on the archmage's door, it's the same roll.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right? There's no tension. There's just like, will this time I be successful or not? And what happens is it's the 7 to 9 choices and the 6- ones where the GM can make things, they don't make it more tense, they can make it more intense.
Yes.
Are there PBTA games that do have a modifier to the player's roll that apply a stat penalty or something like this, that they can pick this lock, but it's gonna be a -1?
I have almost never seen that. There are
Okay.
a few games that do advantage disadvantage, like
Okay.
roll an extra die, like roll 3d6,
Yep.
pick lowest 2.
Yep.
I in Hydra Hackers use an advantage disadvantage very sparingly. But I have it in there, like if you are injured and you are trying to make a move, you roll with disadvantage.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there isn't really most PBTA games do not.
And we've played a
have
shit
those.
ton of PBTA games, so
Right.
Well, that's why I was wondering, because I've played a bunch of them, but haven't played them anywhere near as much as you guys
No,
have.
the places where you get +1s is like you get +1s if someone helps you.
Yep.
Right. And often the help move comes into play. The other
Yep.
place you can get a +1 is like some moves will grant you a +1 forward. So like if you did
Yep.
gather info and you learned about the the Archmage's lock, then you can make this roll with a +1 forward.
Okay.
And you can get that +1. But never, almost never, and I'm sure there's a PBTA game that does it now that we've said that. But by and large, the majority of PBTA games do not let the GM say, oh, this lock is easier or harder, I'm going to give you a +2 or -2. You just roll. But and I think that difference is that, like I said, in a Fate game, if I tell you to open this lock, it's a +8, you are like, oh shit.
yeah.
Maybe I need to create an advantage before I open this lock. Or maybe I need to tap I'm going to need to tap an aspect plus, like a personal aspect plus a situational aspect. I'm going to have to burn some, fate points here. In PBTA, it's not tension, it's intensity. Because the narrative plays a part in how you define the, so if you roll a 6- on the baker's door, I'm going to tell you something like, your lockpick breaks in the door.
Yep.
You roll a 6- on the Archmage's door, and I'm like, fucking lightning bolt goes off. Take, roll 2d12 highest of the 2 for damage.
And I would argue that's even one of the less exciting options, because you're just doing
it's totally
damage.
the less exciting. Right.
It's like, you triggered the
teleports
magical trap and something weird's about to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like, you don't know what it is.
So I think I think the real big difference between those two is the difference between tension and intensity.
And I would argue that the PBTA game would be leaning towards the art side of setting difficulty, because in essence, you're kind of, when you're making your GM move at the 6-, in a way, you're kind of setting the difficulty from a certain perspective.
You're setting the outcome,
but
right?
Yeah,
like
it takes some skill, some practice to be able to make those kind of choices on the fly in a game.
GM,
I would say a good Powered by the Apocalypse GM will never to almost never just fall back on, I do damaging.
There are times where you need to do it.
There's times when that's the thing to do, but there's almost always some other more interesting thing that does something to the plot or the story that creates more flavor, creates more intensity, amps things up, whatever. And that to me is where the fun of those games is.
So I'll tell you, there's a great story. In fact, you can listen to it. The Gauntlet, Discern Realities, Jason Cordova's show, had a little mini actual play in the adventure, and it was about this thief. And this thief breaks into this temple and confronts this like prismatic snake. And the player rolls like 3 6- in a row to get away from the snake. And Jason had no other choice but to eat the character.
So, as far as games with difficulty and no difficulty, what can you learn from each one? I think the first thing is that, just as we said, there are going to be the problem with games with no difficulty is that every challenge is the same, and so the big thing you're going to see is that the results are going to vary, And some players might not like that. They might want to have a higher difficulty or an easier difficulty. And games with no difficulty also, if they have a mitigation mechanic, you'll sometimes see them hoarding their mitigation tokens towards the end of the game. And so you look at things, that makes a big difference. I play a lot of Savage Worlds. The average difficulty in Savage Worlds is a 4. And there are things that are often more difficult, but 9 times out of 10, your difficulty is going to be a 4. Which means that as the players become more powerful, you're going to see them succeed at standard tasks more often. And so you might need to factor something in from a different game system to make it more challenging for them. Or just know that the players are going to be superheroes, which is kind of what a game like Savage Worlds is designed around. The idea that you're going to be playing at that level. I still prefer games that have a difficulty level. As a GM, I find it's easier to set the tone and pacing of the game. I don't GM a lot of PBTA games. I play a lot of PBTA games. I don't GM a lot of PBTA games. So that makes a difference. The other thing is that the problem with games that don't have a scaling, that don't have a difficulty, is that it also makes it more difficult for players who have a weak stat or weak ability to be able to accomplish certain tasks on a regular basis. So having a low stat, for example, in a PBTA game, having a -1 or a -2 in a stat will severely hamper, or can severely hamper success. Now, because most PBTA games, you gain experience points by failing, you'll level up faster, that sort of thing happens. But just understand there are going to be players, if a player likes to do something and they happen to have a low stat in it, they may find themselves constantly getting 6 minuses and not getting positive results. The advantage in PBTA games is that a 6 minus isn't always a failure. It's just a failure with a complication. So I think that's really all I'm going to learn from those two systems. Bob, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think from the perspective of like the PBTA games, as I mentioned during Phil's part, you are, as a GM, you are responsible for determining what's going on when that 6 minus comes up.
Yep.
And what that can do for you, if you do that enough, you're going to learn how to keep things flowing and keep them interesting, and how to juggle those situations. Because when the first time you've ever done it, it's like it's kind of a system shock if you've never played that before. But again, everybody's got to be on board for that. If you've got players that are that aren't fond of that kind of thing, they would rather have a difficulty so they know they've got high difficulties and low difficulties and whatnot. They're not going to enjoy that kind of game. That's just not going to work very well for them because it's more static from the player perspective. But beyond that, I think what you and Phil have said, I would agree with all of that, and I don't really have too much more to add to that. So
I think the other thing I would add is that I think in a lot of in order for games with no difficulties to work well, you need a lot more player GM trust.
Sure, absolutely.
Because players are going to be much less likely to take risks if they know that the result of a failure is going to be much more open to GM interpretation. And if you've got GMs who always like to stick it to the players, that can, again, lead to distrust and lead to players not taking as many chances.
Yep.
And so it's also, at the flip side, that's also a good way to build GM player trust when the players do fail and the GM doesn't screw them over. And one of the best ways I've seen to do that is just ask the players, okay, what do you think would be a good failure here? I've got some ideas, but you have something in mind. Or what would be a good complication here? Giving them that option is these can be good ways to build player trust up.
Sure.
For other game systems.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Totally.
All right. Okay.
Cool.
Phil is still dealing with a few things locally, so he'll be back a little bit later. But that's going to conclude our discussion about difficulties themselves. But we hope that if you're playing games where you're setting difficulties, you'll find what we talked about tonight useful.
And since we don't have a chat room to check in, we are going to move right on into the conversation corner. Cue the conversation corner bumper right here. So this is the part where we talk about everything else that's going on in our lives, in gaming, in the community, and whatnot. So Jerry, what's been going on with you?
Okay, well, at the suggestion of one Bob Everson, I decided to check out Lower Decks. I've always enjoyed Star Trek. I came into it with the original series. The Next Generation was entertaining to me, but it was never my favorite. I was a big Deep Space Nine guy. But doing our watch party, we've begun to see a lot of tropes and things come across. A lot of things that make Trek very gameable because of what's there. And when I heard Lower Decks came out and I saw the ads for it, I kind of thought it was going to be another kind of goofy parody. From the animation style, I was almost afraid it was going to be like a Family Guy kind of raunchy, dirty, difficult, insulting thing. It's none of those. Lower Decks is a very good Star Trek series. They are doing an homage to the Star Trek. There's a lot of humor involved, but the humor is always wink and nod, laughing with the people there, not laughing at them. Yeah. The stories are really good. The action sequences are really good. And the characters are really developed. The plots move along in a good way. And there's a lot of just really funny in-jokes that other people who are fond of Star Trek will get, where the people that are... The Lower Decks is all about the people on the ships that actually aren't involved in the main storylines and are always dealing with the stuff that happens while other stuff is going on. But there's comments on things like, we want to do that. Yeah, well, that's an enterprise. That's a job they'll assign the Enterprise to, We're going to get stuck doing Second Contact where we do all the paperwork, that kind of thing. So I really found the show to be a lot of fun. Saturday, I was just kind of feeling tired and I didn't want to sit through something serious. And Bob had made a comment, so I decided to watch the show. I was 10 minutes in and I'm like, well, I know I'm binge watching for the rest of Saturday. And it was worth it. I'm up to season 6 in Venture Brothers, which is a different kind of comedy. And I'm getting a lot of feels for how to do pulp chops and running gags. We played DCC last week. And I think we're getting kind of towards the end of the Star Wound of Abaddon. We're getting a lot of chances now to roleplay these characters after a pretty grueling funnel initially, and then a couple of early adventures. We now have our separate characters, and it's been a lot of fun. And I'm watching all the player characters gain some personality. That's a lot of fun. We also did our first session of Band of Blades, and that was pretty wild. I don't play a lot of Forge of the Dark games. I've played a few of them. Band of Blades is some pretty hardcore stuff, and it's a lot of fun. I'll let Bob probably talk a little bit about it, too. Friday, we decided that we're in a good place for our D&D Eberron game to take a pause, and so we did session 0 for Dresden Files, which I see that Bob is going to talk about, so I'll let him go on that. Sunday, we did our Savage Eberron game, which was almost entirely a role-playing situation where the players found themselves on a boat chasing down an enemy and finding out that the entire boat is staffed by another enemy of theirs who is willing to work with them. And lots of secrets were revealed, lots of tension, lots of negotiation, and also one date was set for the future between 2 of the characters. So the meet cutes keep going on.
Cool.
And lastly, I've just been building a lot of fun Lego stuff. It's been nice to do small Lego sets that I've gotten that are giving me some peace. End of the day, when things get crazy, I can put something together and relax. So
Not crazy.
Yep. Sorry. Creative. How about that? Better?
Yeah.
When things get difficult. So Phil, you want to jump in next? Conversation corner?
Yeah. Sorry about
That's all right.
Sorry about stepping away for a few minutes as
Anytime.
things went a little sideways in the house. Anyway, things I've been doing. I've been playing Minecraft. I am definitely getting close to the end. I'm definitely in the late stages of the this stone block pack I've been playing. The pack is excellent. It has some late game mods in it, which are actually kind of interesting because they're they actually give you something to do, and they give you something to do, and the resources that are required are pretty steep. So there's actually like something to build up towards. But I'm getting a chance at trying 2 mods that I've found really interesting. Project E, which is basically energy to matter conversion, which is really interesting in that anything that you've built one of, you put in this table and it kind of then remembers the formula for it. Okay. And then you can just destroy a whole bunch of matter by just chucking it into the table, and it creates like an EMC like pool of energy, like gives you like a numeric value. And then you can just take out items from it no matter what the formula is. You don't even have to craft them. So like I stuck a 64K ME drive in there. Anytime I need one now, I can just pull one out. I don't have to craft it. I don't have to auto craft it or anything. And I've kind of gamed the system because I figured out the highest EMC value item to destroy to get the most points, which is emeralds, which the game has emerald chickens.
There you go.
So I built an array of emerald chickens that are basically producing emerald blocks that I can now destroy. Like I just am destroying them in mass. So I'm just building up all this EMC. Like I'm heading into the end game. I don't know how much more I can play out of this game. Like I don't know how many more things there are. There's some tasks that I could definitely complete or whatever, but I'm beyond resource dependent. Like I don't have to mine. I never have to leave my base. Like I can generate resources on demand now. So I don't know. It's still interesting, and I'm not ready to do it away yet. I may for my end game kind of do what I've been watching this one YouTube player do, which is he blew away his entire base and then started from scratch, and he made like this super cool base because now resources aren't really an issue. I may do something like that. I finished Cobra Kai season 2 for a second time. Holy shit. Forgot how good that series ends.
Yep.
It is amazing. Keeping up on the DS9, of course. I'm watching Voyager and I've reached season 4. And I now understand something about both Voyager and DS9 I did not understand before. There was one showrunner who was in the first 2 seasons of DS9. I think it's like Brannon. He moves in season 3 to Voyager. And I like DS9 a whole lot better after he leaves. He leaves the show after 3 seasons of Voyager. And season 4 of Voyager is awesome. And now I think it's this guy. Like, I think the problem is it was this guy all along. Because season 4 Voyager, like, I've been making the list and compiling it, and like season 4 Voyager, I'm like, okay, we got to watch episode 1, of course, because that's the cliffhanger from season 3. Then we got to watch episodes 2, 3, 4. Guess we don't have to watch 5, but we probably should. Like it's been one good episode after another, and I'm like, like, I think I understand the problem here. Like, I think I'm seeing
got
where
a showrunner that is, for lack of a better term, not as adept as another showrunner, perhaps.
I don't know.
It makes a big difference in the show.
I don't like. I don't think he was less. I don't know. I don't think it was less adept. I don't think I liked his style for it.
Yeah.
The stories get like so much better in season 4 Voyager.
It's like looking at Scott Buck being showrunner for season 1 of Iron Fist and the entirety of the Inhumans. Right. And both of those shows are like, well, I can see Scott Buck had his hand in this.
Exactly. Like, So anyway, so I made it through the first 3 seasons of Voyager, and I was like, Voyager's kind of growing on me. And then like the last, like I've been watching, like I'm like 5 or 6 episodes into season 4, and I'm like, oh, this is good. Like this is good. Cool. So that's exciting. And I've been gearing up for cold weather biking because the weather is starting to get below 60. And that makes bike riding a little chilly. So I went and purchased everything I needed for cold weather riding. So I got myself a nice Columbia jacket, like a light Columbia jacket that's wind resistant and water resistant. So that was nice. Some fleece windbreaker pants to, keep the legs warm, and a skull cap to go underneath my bike helmet so that my head doesn't freeze. And I just got my gloves today.
Nice.
My riding gloves. So like, I'm ready. Like, I think I'm good for like another 10 to 15 degrees of temperature to go. Like, I think 40 is when this outfit will not cut it anymore. So I think I got a few more weeks of riding left to go. And I want to I want to push it as long as I can push it until it's just impossible to take the bike out. So that's me, and I talked about playing Hades at the top of the show, so cool. I've been doing that as well.
All right, so I'm still working my way through the Clone Wars. I have now come upon the young Saw Gerrera in his formative years on his home planet. I've seen the Wookiee youngling now searching for his crystal for his lightsaber.
Yep.
Gunji, his lightsaber is awesome. I love what he ends up with. And there's some interesting episodes. One for sure that I've already seen and one that's coming up next where you get the classic, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, where people that have been on opposite sides in previous episodes have joined forces to take on somebody else. So those are always fun.
There's a lot of good stuff with those.
Yeah, definitely enjoying that. As Jerry said, we're gearing up for Dresden Files in place of our 5e Eberron game. I have, in the back of my mind, been wanting to play a game of the Dresden Files RPG for a while. I actually ran, using a system called True 20, I ran a very brief Dresden Files set campaign where only one person had read some, like a couple of the books besides me. And it was, not one of my better outings, but we were all kind of like, I don't know. It was not a great game, but it wasn't really any one particular person's fault. It just didn't really work.
Well, that's why I think this one's going to be interesting, because you and the GM both have pretty extensive Dresden knowledge. Yep. I've read 3 of the books, and the other player has seen the TV show.
Yeah, so we all know what the world is about, what the gist of certain things is. We've got some interesting character ideas. I decided that it would be interesting for my character to have, at one point, been the bearer of one of the silver coins of the Denarians, the fallen angels, which adds all kinds of interesting meat to the role-playing bone. So
a little bit.
So looking forward to that. That's going to be interesting. And Chris, I think, will be a great GM for that because, again, Chris.
Oh, he's very versed. He's very versed in that.
He knows what's going on. So.
Yep.
And then we, as Jerry said, we had our first regular session of Band of Blades where we went on our first mission. This is the first mission where all the characters that you made in character creation go on the mission. And that's the only time that happens. After that, we have 4 players. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, 4 players. So we had 4 regular PCs. And then a couple of the low-level soldier grunt type people. But when you go into the full-on play of this game, the way the game is structured, one of the people takes on one of the higher-end roles where you're like the quartermaster or you're the marshal who decides who goes on missions. And then you send only 2 of the main characters on the mission, and everybody else who's going on the mission from a player perspective plays either a soldier or a rookie. Is that what I think they're called rookies. Mm-hmm. And so you're not playing the character that you created in every session that you play. So, and that's where the troop thing comes in. We're going to have a couple more of the character playbooks that we've got that we're going to have to make. And then depending on what the mission is, different characters are going to get picked to go on the mission, and away you go. So, but we had our first mission where all the characters that we made went, and it was gritty, and we had a couple of moments where it didn't look good, and I nearly killed myself because Gator's character is my character's sister and younger sister, and she got in a bad way, and she tried to do this real cool maneuver where she jumped off of this tower with a rope and tried to swing down into the courtyard. And unfortunately, it did not work well, and she came down hard, and she blew her knee out, and she couldn't walk. And therefore, she couldn't move fast across the courtyard to escape all the shambling undead and these fiery suits of armor that were coming after us. And so one of the things on my character sheet, there's this particular kind of ammunition called, and I can't think of what the damn thing is called now, but essentially it's almost like a pocket nuke kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
But not actually nuclear in that sense. And in order to use it, first of all, you have to have it available to you. Second of all, you have to bleed on it and take a trauma. Now, in this game, if you collect too many traumas, you're out of the game. Right?
Yeah.
So I had to take a trauma in order to launch this weapon. And I launched this thing and saved my sister's life, and we all got out. But even if it wasn't my sister, if it was one of the other characters, I probably would have done the same thing because I would want to make sure that everybody made it out alive. But yeah, it was a grueling moment where I was like, I got to do this thing. And everybody's like, all right, what do you got to do? Well, I got to bleed on it, so I have to take a trauma. And I'm like, what? It's like, yep, that's what I got to do.
Yeah, but then when you used it, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, the effect was spectacular, and we all got out and away we went. So that was fun as hell, and looking forward to the next session when we get to take a subset of the player characters and some of the lower level grunt type people, and we get to role play those. That'll be fun. Besides that, been jumped into my solo version of Minecraft again for a little bit, and decided
making a pretty nice house in there.
Yeah, I had I occasionally just flip through Pinterest and look at some of the stuff that other people design in Minecraft, and when a particular design catches my eye, I'll save the picture for later, and so I'll dig those out every once in a while. I'll be like, all right, let me see if I can make something like this, and I'm like, this is interesting. It's asymmetrical, so right out of the gate, I got to fix that. I got to make it symmetrical because asymmetry bothers me like no end. But it's a tiered structure with gardens on the edges and then a house in the middle and the back. And I thought it looked interesting, so I made it.
Yeah, it's a nice design.
Yeah. And of course, anytime I come upon an interesting structure or I make a structure, I will then take the schematics of it and save it, so that I can recreate it in any future instance of Minecraft that we
deploy it in future use.
So that is me. That's what's been going on.
All right. Well, we've reached, I think, the end of the show, and what a wild ride it's been tonight.
Yes. Let's do some Patreon shout outs, and then we can decide what we want to do about an after show for
a few minutes.
Yep. So thank you for being our patrons, Dan Simons, David Walker, Donahue. I always want to say Donahue, but it's not. It's Donogh McCarthy. Drew Smith, secret weapon of the show. Glenn Seiler, good friend and table companion for many games. Jason Pinella, Jason Pitt, who we just had on last week talking about SIG City of Blades. Check out the Kickstarter. Jean Lorbert, Jeff Stevens, and Jim Morrison.
The Jim Morrison.
Wait, Jim Morrison?
Break on through,
baby. All right. Thank you to them, and thanks to everyone for listening to this podcast when it comes out.
Yes. If you are free on Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. the Queen's time, you're welcome. Come join us live on Twitch, where most of the time we'll be there. And you can chat with the other listeners in the awesome chat room for life. Ask us, of course, the occasional question.
I mean, technically, even if we're not on, they can get on the chat room for life and chat with each other.
They totally could just talk. They could just totally hang out without us there. That's fine.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, if you can't make the live show, like tonight, check out our podcast each week, wherever you get your podcasts. And take a listen to some of the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, such as Down with D&D, Bone Storm Obsidian, the FM Gamers, Panda's Talking Games, the Gnomecast, Zhang Hustle, She's a Super Geek, and Bonus Experience. You can and should also check out our sibling podcasts, Tabletop Bellhop, Amo, The Knights of the Night, and the always amazing Gaming MBS.
Before you tell your players what the DC for that check is, leave us some feedback. You can reach us directly via email, mmp@misdirectedmark.com. Check us out on Twitter. The show and the network is @misdirectedmark. He's Robert. I'm pointing because, like, you can see us. You can't. He's Robert M. Everson. He's GM Gerrymander, and I am DNA Phil.
If you like what we do here and on the other shows in the Misdirected Mark Network, please consider supporting our Patreon campaigns. MMP, Down with D&D, and Panda's Talking Games are at patreon.com/MMP. She's a Super Geek is at patreon.com/SassGeek. Zhang Hustle is at patreon.com/Zhang Hustle. And Bonus Experience is at patreon.com/Bonus Experience. Patrons of MMP, Down with D&D, and Panda's Talking Games get access to the after show, the pre-production show notes, musical parodies when we do them, and the Panda's Talking Games bonus outtakes, and every once in a while we have some other special releases for you.
That's right. But this has been a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs. Mic drop!
We out.